We're talking about unchecked aggression here.
Well, I'm busted. Yes, I'm busted.
Am I wrong?
No.
Am I wrong?
Trigger warnings, safe spaces, microaggressions, unconscious bias, and lived experience. The language of therapy is now used widely and indiscriminately. We live in a time where stoicism and rationality are seen as antiquated, harmful even. Instead, we are encouraged to normalise eccentricities and perversions while endlessly focusing on our needs, our emotions, self-care, and our inner child. And yet, more and more of us are looking out at our culture and society and feel like we are observing a psychiatric ward. The world's gone mad, many of us cry.
We're hovering between two ages, caught up in this uncomfortable transition. Some kind of reset is upon us. The world is in flux, and we all know it. We can feel it. Every social structure and every person becomes a potential threat. Every news story becomes a potential threat. We see enemies everywhere. This is the crisis stage, when the new order begins to exert itself and actually take control of institutions and structures. In 1966, sociologists Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven produced an article that explained a certain method. Essentially, the method involves destabilizing nations by overwhelming government structures. One such strategy was to combat poverty by dramatically increasing the number of welfare recipients, overwhelming the system with applications to create a financial and administrative crisis that would create the circumstances for tearing down the existing system and implementing radical change to equity.
White people came here. They need to assimilate to our culture, not the other way around. It's bad enough we speak their language with a proficiency that they cannot even master. They need to assimilate to Ubuntu. That's the only way in which we can coexist within this environment. Otherwise, we will slaughter all of them, drive them to the sea, literally. The majority of black people, right, have been oppressed by white people and the white system. And if at any point they decide that they want to drive people to the sea, I will not discourage them.
And wealth redistribution. This strategy is built on several key assumptions. And if it sounds familiar to you, there's a good reason for that. This is the dialectical process. It assumes systemic inequality. It assumes that the system is broken and discriminatory. It assumes that crisis is really a catalyst, an effective method for positive outcome. From the start, this method is cynical and morally repugnant. It's a Machiavellian strategy based on false promises, manipulation, and intentional chaos and destruction. Proverbs 6:16-19 says, "The Lord hates a heart that devises wicked plans." So the most obvious problem with this sort of sick strategy is that it always harms the very ones it claims to be helping.
In the late 80s and early 90s, we were searching for ANC officials living in exile camps and integrated them already at that time into our community.
What about once the system is ultimately destroyed? What's going to replace it? Who actually benefits? History has shown us time and time and time again that these insane strategies do not result in new, reformed, gloriously balanced systems. Governments always react to such fiscal crises with more austerity measures, not less. And less social welfare, not more. And a lower standard of living, not higher. Socialists, aka communists, aka Marxists, they're all the same thing. They never deliver on their promises because they can't. Their ideas are based on false premises, pipe dreams, and outright lies. Worse. They always make poverty worse rather than alleviating it. Almost like that was the plan all along.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is not difficult. It is now very obvious that the idea of growth and democracy are inextricably linked. The discussion today comes 1 year ahead of big elections in major democracies, including the United States, the UK, and of course the European Union. In these elections, every party, from left to right, will talk about economic growth. We are all here to change that. We are all here to show that the emperor or the empress has no clothes. The obsession with economic growth is clearly failing the majority of people. Let's be clear, democracies are under threat.
Is that true? Is it true that that capitalism is failing?
Because they're causing it to do so.
It's only happening because that's exactly what they're doing to it. Let's listen to the...
Enough is enough. A growth economy and extractive economy is not servicing.
So what is the counter to a growth economy?
Degrowth.
What is degrowth?
People don't want economic growth. They want economic security. They want ecological stability. They want government investment in their future. And
remember, the people who offer you security, prisoners, are some of the most secure people in the world. They have all their needs met every day, all day.
The EU could achieve energy security, food security, and economic security. How do we achieve it? We need leadership from the EU to shift the economic system from one that is grounded in power and profit and patriarchy to one that is anchored in people, planet, and prosperity.
Triple bottom line.
There it is.
People, planet, profit.
There's the old, she says prosperity, they mean profit, for sure.
All right. So you can see there's a term here, wokeist. Wokeist is a combo of woke and Marxist. I was thinking these wokeists, and I think it really works because obviously it's one and the same. What we're going to be thinking about is some terms: negative thinking, repression and trauma, repressive tolerance and liberating tolerance, and how with this woke mob mentality, they use a different dictionary. They have the same vocabulary, but they use a different dictionary. And we're all tossing around in this storm. We're in the waves and we're crashing around. And so we felt that this was a really good message, hopefully, for you guys that would help you to take yourself out of that storm and realize on another level just what's happening. The woke are people who are supposedly awake to see what the oppressor is doing, right? The ways that they're being oppressed, the system that they have to take down. So they're woke. But we also have this other movement that very much talks about awakening, and it's in the Christian truther realm. It's in the Christless conservative realm. It's in the Max Egan, David Icke, New Age movement. All right, so just think about also how if you're in these different movements, you're actually both awake, right? One is woke, one is awake. And the other thing about it is in the cocoon of algorithms and AI, you're constantly in this echo chamber that reinforces this message, whether you're coming at it from the more liberal side or the more conservative side. Okay, so awake is woke, and you're in your bubble wrap. You're insulated. You're being told all of these different messages that reinforce your worldview. Waking up is not salvation. Okay, we know that. We've talked about that before in the past.
Just to give a little more context on that, with the advent of the internet and social media and
the
blogging,
tool of social media.
Yeah, the blogging and the online truth movement. It existed before that, but it was very fringe. But then it grew in strength and numbers. So the idea was, we're going to liberate ourselves with this knowledge. We're going to expose the darkness, and that's going to make us wiser, and we're going to overcome. And in fact, in learning about all these things came the libertarian movement. After that came the anarchist movement out of the truth movement. Tear down the government is evil. It can't be trusted at all, ever.
Right.
So we have to tear it down. Where did they get that idea? This thing has been implanted in us as a process of progressivism.
Well, what we're going to say here is liberating tolerance. So we've told you about Marcuse and how they've used psychology as a weapon of the ruling class. Herbert Marcuse popularized this. And so this is the idea of playing on people's traumas in order to strike chords, very real chords within people, things that really happen in true life, but then manipulate the system. The vocabulary is different between us and them, as it were. So Marcuse's reinterpretation of repression leads to a paradoxical view of tolerance. In his 1965 essay, Repressive Tolerance, Marcuse argues that tolerance in modern society serves to maintain the status quo, following traditional values to persist and remain unchallenged. To counter this, Marcuse advocates for liberating tolerance, which involves actively opposing ideas and values that perpetuate societal repression, particularly those that align with traditional and Christian values.
Originating in the 1930s, the Frankfurt School were a group of radical far-left academics who sought to merge Freud's psychoanalytic theory with Marxism. This merger would become to be known as critical theory, and it would seek to dismantle and upturn prevailing power structures. The most influential among the critical theorists was Herbert Marcuse. Building on Freud's emphasis on repression, Marcuse proposed that a tolerant liberal society should be thought as exhibiting a form of societal repression, a notion he termed repressive tolerance. And to achieve this would require an intolerance and even violence towards anyone who opposed communism. Alongside this, anxiety and alienation signalled being in contact with the reality of your own oppression, whereas happiness, belonging and positivity were a sign that you had developed false consciousness and internalised your own oppression. And what was the cure for your false consciousness? To awaken a critical consciousness, to become woke, to become just as resentful and cynical as the critical theorists themselves. So, real tolerance is being intolerant, negative thinking is positive, and happiness is oppression. If this all sounds insane, it's because it is.
Awakening, in a sense, is woke. It is liberating tolerance. It is a wokeist Marxist concept. So it serves to deconstruct reality, undermine social cohesion, attack reality itself. This concept of negative thinking emphasizes the importance of critical dialectical analysis in understanding and transforming reality. So in layman's terms, it means that you need to implement the skill of critical thinking and dissecting, in other words, to bring about the change that you want, the systemic change that you want. And I know that this is going to be ringing bells for people. So negative thinking drives dialectical thought by continuously challenging existing realities, revealing their internal contradictions and inadequacies. This process is crucial for any meaningful critique and change, as it uncovers the dynamic and contradictory nature of reality, pointing towards possibilities for transformation, and they would say improvement. It's a false light movement. It's charging you up to implement the skill set of negative thinking. So, some of these concepts would be to free you from the patriarchy if you were going through the revolution, the women's revolution, and free your mind, give you gnosis, the knowledge of good and evil. It appeals to that. We all have this intrinsic desire to know. So it's about toppling the old world systems to supposedly bring in the promise of the new. So in dialectical thought, negative thinking refers to the process of critique and contradiction. It involves questioning and challenging existing conditions and norms, revealing their contradictions and inadequacies. And originating from Hegelian philosophy, dialectical thought is a method of analysis that understands reality as dynamic and contradictory. It progresses through the resolution of contradictions, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis.
The critical theorists began to notice a problem preventing their communist utopia. Living conditions had improved so dramatically for the working classes, they lacked a desire for full-scale revolution. In response to this, a shift began to happen. Oppression in economic terms began to be replaced by oppression in relation to identity, namely gender, sexuality, and race. In the 1950s, the French-Algerian psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Frantz Fanon joined the Algerian National Liberation Front. In his writings, Fanon praised the Nazis for resolving Germany's border issues by force, and he urged a similar violent revolution in Algeria to achieve the same cultural purification.
Just to make it clear, this is one of the heroes of the kids you see marching in the streets and spray paint in Washington, D.C.
Post-colonial studies.
During this time, Fanon was making his own contributions to critical theory, specifically on the subject of race, paving the way for the decolonization movement. In keeping with the Marxist separation of people into either oppressors or oppressed, Fanon saw people not as individuals, but as colonizers or colonized. Fanon took the Nazi prejudices applied to Jews, that they were all rich, all powerful, and to blame for all the evil in the world, and he applied this to white Europeans.
The denial that it's legit, that it's a good thing to treat people as individuals, and instead we see people as ciphers or proxies of a collective identity based on race, and that's really harmful. It's harmful because it's dehumanizing.
For Fanon, revolutionary murder is a necessity. Political violence is presented as being therapeutic, and the mass killing of Europeans a kind of psychiatric treatment. And what exactly did so-called decolonization look like for Fanon?
Alright, Gamasa, Hulet, Kita, Kilame, Kiriwata, Samarmo, Hasisha. Where were you when I'm treated? Where were you when I'm dreamt? Sofa skichi, emoye, sofa skichi, etati, kichima, Sipram konto, alliance, shoot to kill, Yamasa, kill the poor, the farmer, kill the poor, the farmer, brr, pa, pa, brr, pa, pa, tension.
A complete destruction of political and economic systems brought about through violent genocide. In Fanon's words, decolonization is quite simply the replacing of a certain species of men by another species of men.
Remember, the number one tactic from these people is to call you what they don't want to be called.
They're conflating the processes of knowledge accumulation with the processes of imperialism and colonialism in the past. And that's the really fatal flaw. That's why if you accept that, then what you are accepting that knowledge and ideas and imagination have no reality of their own, which is why I would call it an anti-realist position regarding knowledge and culture, because they're conflating it with political and historical processes. And I think we need to observe that distinction to allow us the freedom to engage in critique. I also think they're wrong historically. The idea that science or mathematics or philosophy, questions about existence, questions about nationhood, have all been entirely white Europeans, is patently untrue. You know, you only have to look at the nationalist leaders in Africa, the writings of Tagore in India, people in Latin America to see that. And so, you know, to sort of say that they're white or Western is, to me, to give up far too much, far too easily to quite a kind of limited, quite racist argument, really.
True hope for justice, peace, and human flourishing is found only in the gospel of Jesus Christ and that blessed hope of the coming of his kingdom. And so remember, with 1 Corinthians 6:11, when we critique these movements and when we think about all that is going on in the world and how evil it looks, remember 1 Corinthians 6:11, and such were some of you. But you were washed and you were sanctified and you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. But Christians can never be unloving or uncaring toward these people. We don't hate communists, we hate communism.